TVBS has invited Harvard professor Tony SAICH to talk about the importance of this year's 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party and the future governing direction of China. Professor SAICH also shares some insights into China's strong stance against the West, as well as its intentions towards Taiwan.
But it's an extremely important symbolic gathering of the party elite. This particular meeting of Urshada is even more important, given that it is almost certain to confirm Xi Jinping's reappointment for a third term at the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. I think it's going to be continuity rather than change, which means that the tough political atmosphere that we've seen in recent years will continue. On the economy, we're liable to see a continuation of a very state-oriented focus to economic activity with private sector, domestic, international, acceptable as long as it pursues and promotes the main priorities of the Chinese Communist Party. But decoupling is possible in some areas, but clearly not in others. You know, I think if we look at trade, if we look at investment, probably, certainly investment, with Congress bringing in new regulations, with China looking more critically at US engagement, that is an area where I think we'll begin to see some decoupling. Similarly with trade. Other areas have already decoupled. AI, for example, and technology. You know, China clearly is developing its own capabilities in that realm. But then there's one area where decoupling is very unlikely and very problematic, and that's with financial markets. It's a multi-trillion-dollar engagement, and China benefits from it enormously. There's no other place to turn to for the depth of capital markets that is offered by the United States. And I think this risk mitigation operates at two levels. The first is what you were just pointing to, and that is doubling down on not alliances, it doesn't like to call things alliances, but much closer relationships with those countries that do not accept US dominance within the global order. And of course, the prime example there is Russia. The second thing of this sort of risk mitigation, I think, is really promoting China's interests in those institutions and policy areas that deal with global public goods. The war in Ukraine is changing China's thinking towards Taiwan. Armed invasion is not really feasible and therefore not likely. I think it's probably convinced the Beijing leadership that they need, as far as possible, to wean itself off reliance on Western technologies. And with that, one could include, of course, Taiwan in terms of semiconductor production. Xi Jinping's actions have not been a premonition for armed invasion. I think it's been primarily with the intention of stopping Taiwan declaring independence, because that would critically undermine Xi Jinping's legitimacy. So I don't think it's to push reunification as such. Xi Jinping is not stupid. I mean, he knows conflict there could be extremely detrimental to China's economic and long-term hopes. And I think he sees the capability to just squeeze Taiwan whenever he thinks it's necessary. I mean, around trade, embargoes, maybe, snipping at one of the outlying islands. He can keep one by one stripping diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to keep up the pressure when Beijing wants to.
TVBS English News.
A little more, not relaxed, but is looking more to a longer term.